Retirement and investment planning can be a very complex process, and in the years leading up to retirement there are a number of strategic decisions that need to be made. Some of them once in a lifetime decisions which you just can't afford to get wrong. In studio with me today is Devon Card, financial planner and director at Torr and Devon, and today we're going to discuss the various investment vehicles that you can use to fund for retirement and the decisions that you will need to make regarding those vehicles pre-retirement, at retirement and post-retirement.
So starting with pre-retirement decisions, naturally there are many investment vehicles that someone can choose to invest in, and the most topical ones leading up to retirement are your well-known retirement annuities, pension funds and provident funds. Now, the big talking point around these three investment vehicles is that all of them prescribe to Regulation 28, which are basically a set of regulations that force retirement annuities, pension funds and provident funds to follow certain rules. And the most important ones to consider are the fact that you can only have a maximum of 45% of your funds exposed to offshore assets, and you are capped at 75% of equity exposure inside these funds. So these certain regulations often deter investors from investing in these funds because some might say that due to these restrictions it could impact the long-term return that you could expect from these type of funds. However, it's important that when constructing your retirement portfolio that returns aren't the only considerations when making these pre-retirement decisions.
So the tax advantages of approved retirement funds are significant and can counter the effects of Regulation 28 when it comes to investment returns. Remember, retirement fund investors can invest up to 27.5% of their taxable earnings towards a retirement fund, capped at 350,000 Rand per year on a tax-deductible basis, which is a significant tax incentive. Further, investors do not pay tax on interest earned in the portfolio. They're not liable for dividends withholding tax, and there are no CGT implications. However, on the downside, these type of funds can be restrictive when it comes to the decisions that investors can make at retirement. Remember, when it comes to retirement funds, investors are not permitted to retire from the funds until the formal retirement age as per the scheme rules. In the case of retirement annuities, the earliest investors can retire is at the age of 55.
So unlike retirement annuities, there is a slight difference when it comes to being invested in a pension and a provident fund. Members of these funds do have the option of accessing their investments pre-55, but only when they resign from the fund or from work or are retrenched from work and are forced to exit the fund. At this point, they will have the option to either cash in their funds, which we do discourage investors from doing. Unfortunately, this kind of behavior, even if the fund is relatively small, can end up reducing your overall retirement base and limit the impacts of compound returns one could enjoy from accumulating all their retirement funds. Often what is recommended is that if you're concerned about future accessibility, not to immediately dip into your pension or provident fund, but rather use what we call a preservation fund when leaving a pension or provident fund. What this preservation fund allows is investors to move their pension or provident funds into this preservation fund, free of any tax, but it does leave them with that once-off partial or full withdrawal from the preservation fund. It is important to note though that while the first 27,500 is tax-free when accessing this preservation fund, the rest will be subject to withdrawal tax.
So while there are tax benefits for investing through retirement funds, it's important to know that investors have restricted opportunities of what they can do with those funds when they retire. So the retirement fund harmonization process really sought to streamline the decisions that investors can take across pension funds, provident funds and preservation funds. So while most of the decisions are in line, there are some technicalities still when it comes to provident fund contributions that were made prior to 1 March 2021.
with the exception of these vested provident funds, prior to 1 March 2021, all other investors who are officially retiring will have the option of commuting, or in layman's terms, cashing in up to 1/3 of their retirement funds, with the first 550,000 being tax-free and the rest being taxed according to the retirement tax tables. The remaining 2/3 of their fund will need to be used to purchase either a life annuity or a living annuity. The fund harmonization rules change as of 1 March 2021. Any vested provident funds, i.e. provident funds up to that date, will have the option of cashing in or commuting the full retirement fund available to the investor. The full fund will then obviously be taxed according to the retirement tax tables. An important note on the retirement tax tables: while investors are allowed 550,000 Rand as a tax-free commutation, often something that is forgotten is that that's not per investment. That is aggregated across all of an investor's various retirement funds, pension funds, or provident funds.
So as you can see, many of the decisions that you have to take at retirement are once-off decisions, and getting them right is essential. For instance, if you purchase a life annuity, you cannot transfer that life annuity at a later stage into a living annuity because the risk is already transferred onto the insurer. Whereas on the other hand, if you first take out a living annuity and you wish to transfer it at a later stage into a life annuity structure, that can be done. So as you can see, these are strategic decisions that need to be made at the point of retirement.
Just touching on living annuities again, because it is probably the more common annuity taken out by investors. Something that is important to consider is obviously that while it is an investment in the name of the investor, there are certain limitations in terms of how you're able to access these funds. Anyone who's invested in a living annuity is allowed to withdraw between 2.5% and 17.5% of the invested capital per year, and you're only allowed to change this drawdown rate once a year at living annuity anniversary. Moving forward, the decision on how much we draw down becomes a very, very important strategic decision from a long-term planning perspective. Certain considerations, like if you draw too much, because living annuities attract taxable income, you could erode your capital by drawing too much, paying too much over to SARS, and ultimately be left in a situation where your funds are eroded too quickly for retirement. Or if you draw too little from your living annuity and you balance the rest of your needs with your discretionary funds, an investor could be left in a situation where they deplete their discretionary funds too quickly and are left with a bit of a liquidity issue later on in retirement.
So once you've structured your investments, the most important thing is to ensure that you regularly review those investments and make sure that the structure is still aligned with your retirement goals. Specifically, a key factor when reviewing your retirement portfolio is to ensure that you have sufficient liquidity in your portfolio to provide for large capital outlays such as home renovations, overseas travel, or weddings, bearing in mind that there could be CGT consequences if you are disposing of units.
During the post-retirement phase, it's important to note that your scenario is going to change on an ongoing basis. And every year, certain decisions are going to need to be made to either address any liquidity issues, minimize tax implications, and also importantly, the investment mandate. Depending on your needs, one might need to adjust the investment strategy to either target a higher return if we need to ensure that our funds aren't being eroded away by inflation, or on the opposite side, it could be a case of we don't need to take on too much investment risk because we have sufficient capital. So it's a constant ongoing decision that needs to be taken into consideration, as well as something like rebalancing the portfolio. Often what investors forget is that as the years go on, your asset allocation might drift as certain asset classes grow in comparison to the other asset classes. And by rebalancing your investment portfolio, you're able to ensure that your investment mandate matches your personal investment objectives and needs in retirement.
And flowing on from that, if you have capital invested in a discretionary portfolio, keep in mind that there may be CGT consequences when rebalancing your portfolio or switching between funds.
There are various investment vehicles that myself and Sue have discussed today, as well as many decisions that someone needs to take into consideration when leading up to retirement, at retirement, and during post-retirement phase as well. What we've put on the screen for you today is just a summary of all the different investment vehicles that you have available to you, and important comments and facts that someone can take into consideration when making these decisions pre, post, and at retirement phase as well.